Hi guys, it's Frank Hoos from MiniLathe.com, returning to making videos after recovering from my knee replacement surgery. Well, back in July, before I needed the knee surgery, I saw this bandsaw go on sale, and I got to thinking about it and decided I really wanted to go for it. It coincided with an unusual point in time where I actually had some extra money available, and it was around $2,000, actually a little more than that with shipping and everything. So it was a big investment. If you're a regular viewer of my videos, you probably have seen my older Delta 14-inch bandsaw that used to sit in the same place in the shop. And it was also a combined wood and metal bandsaw. And it was pretty well made. It was decent, but it really just didn't have the horsepower to cut through aluminum even. Anything thicker than about a 1/4-inch plate, it would really just get bogged down and take too long. So I decided to go with this one, and I got it here, got it set up, and I haven't had time to do a whole lot with it, but I've done some cutting of the type of metal that I typically needed it for, and I've been happy with the results so far. And I've done a few wood cutting jobs with it, which it is great for, of course. That's easy stuff, right? So let's dig in and take a closer look at it. And of course, like any new machine in my shop, it doesn't stay here long before I start making some modifications to it. This is no exception, so we'll look at those. The table is a pretty massive chunk of cast iron. It's nicely machined across the surface, so if you run your hand across it, you can't feel any real surface imperfections. The fence also is a solid piece of cast iron, so it's pretty heavy. I haven't weighed it, but I would say it's more than 10 pounds. At the back of the fence, there's an adjustment screw and a plastic bushing or bearing that rides along another guide so that the fence stays level. And when you set it up, you adjust the height and so that it's just parallel with the table surface. The fence also comes with this vertical extension used for resawing. So if you're a woodworker and you have a board and you want to saw it along its thickness like this to get two thinner boards, you can use this special fence for that purpose. But I'm not much of a woodworker, and that's an operation I do very rarely. So I keep this off of the bandsaw and stored on the back panel. Someday I'll probably need to use that, and it's nice to have it. The fence setup is very nice. I have a locking handle here, and I keep this safety tape on here because it sticks out. And in the tight confines of my shop, it's really easy to walk into or back into something like this. So I have a few handles on machines that stick out like this, and I keep this tape on them. Most of the time I'll have some air circulation in the shop, and these kind of blow in the wind and make you aware that you're getting close to something that could stick you in the back. So that's what that's about. But this slides really smoothly, and when you hold it down, it locks very tightly. And when you look down here, there's a little magnifier there that lets you accurately position the red line and get your dimension just where you want it. There's a calibration process that you go through when you set up the bandsaw to make sure what you read on the scale corresponds to reality at the blade. Currently I have this 1-inch wide blade on here, and it turns out that I didn't plan to buy a blade that wide. It was a mistake I made in ordering for the first time, but it actually works well for cutting metal, which is what I got it for. So I'm leaving it on there for now, and as long as it does what I want, then that's good. So it's a fairly coarse tooth pattern, as you can see, but if you're cutting metal that's, more than, say, a 1/4-inch thick, that's what you want to cut quickly. You can use blades down to, I guess, about 1/8 of an inch wide if you're doing woodworking or some other kind of fine detail scroll type work where you need to make fairly tight turns. You want a very narrow blade and probably thinner across the teeth, as well as more teeth per inch than you have on this blade. And you have this nice double ball bearing blade guide here, and there's another ball bearing in the back, for the front to back limitation of it. These are elliptical or cam shaped, So when you want to align the blade, you can turn these by hand to bring the roller bearings very close to the side of the blade. Then over here on the right hand side we have a scale both in inches and centimeters, and that goes up against this indicator here so you can read the height, although I've never really had to do that. Whenever I'm working, I just keep these bearings down fairly close to the surface of the work to minimize flex of the blade. But of course, not only does it keep the blade from flexing excessively, but this also serves to protect what otherwise would be an exposed part of the blade. When you want to change the height of the blade guide, you turn this crank here, but first you have to loosen this locking handle on the back side of the bandsaw. So you give that a quarter turn or so, then you use this crank to raise or lower the guide, and then when you have it where you want it, lock this in place again. To change the angle setting, you loosen the handle by rotating it counterclockwise, pull back on the locking pin, and then grasp the protractor, set it to the angle you want, then lock it down. And there are also stops at -45, 0, and +45 degrees. The pin only goes in at the 45 and -45 degree and 0 degree positions, so for any other intermediate angle it stays in the out position. The face of the miter gauge doesn't come all the way over to the blade, so if you're doing close-up work you may need to make some sort of an extension. And I think that must be common practice because it looks like there are screw points here for that purpose. Before you tilt the table, make sure that your fence is locked down and that the miter gauge is removed, or they may slide out of place. Down underneath the table are these two handles that are used to tilt the table. This first one is a locking handle, so to tilt the table you turn this about a quarter turn or half a turn counterclockwise to unlock it. On both of these handles you can pull out on them and set it to whatever angle is convenient. So if you can't get it all the way to where you need it, you just pull it out and reset it. This second handle then is used to actually raise and lower the table, and it works through a gear drive, and you can step through it by moving the handle in and out until you get it at the angle that you want. And when it's all the way down, it hits this positive stop here. When you set up the bandsaw, there's a stop screw here, and you adjust the table to the 0 degree or level position, and so that gives you a positive stop if you've had it tilted and you bring it back down. Well, let's take a look at what's behind door number 1. The door is held shut by this cam lock knob, which keeps the door from rattling when the saw is in operation. Well, we have the upper wheel here, which is just passive. It's actually driven by the blade that comes around, which is powered down below, of course. We have a sealed bearing here, probably two, I think, one in the front and one in the back. Blade comes down here into the upper part of the blade guide that we looked at earlier. This yellow arm here is a blade tension indicator. The numbers on the scale are just arbitrary units. The larger blades you want more tension, and smaller blades you want less tension. So there's some guidelines that come with the saw to give you some indication of what tension to use. This big knob here is the blade tension adjustment. So you rotate this knob and you can watch this scale while you're making the adjustment. Behind the wheel you can see there's a large coil spring, and that's what is actually applying the tension to the blade. Of course, for safety you want the door closed when you have the blade running. So Grizzly has provided this little viewing window here that lets you see the tension setting while you're adjusting the knob with the door closed. And so when you close the door, you just turn this knob and it cams against that screw and closes it, holds it tightly. Well, I'm looking at the lower door right now. You can see this got this elegant plate here that says it's an Extreme Series, and that's a feature on some of the higher end bandsaws or other tools, table saws and so forth. I'm not exactly sure all of what you get in the Extreme series, but it looks pretty cool. Over here on the right side, you can see these two exhaust ports that are designed for hooking up a vacuum system to suck up the chips. These actually are intended to be used with a 4-inch diameter vacuum hose, but I put some standard plumbing fixtures on here with duct tape because I wanted to use my vacuum that I have here in the shop. I'll show you how that works later. I'm not currently using the lower one. I need to make some sort of a Y adapter so I can suck air through both of them at the same time. Over here we have the cam locking knob for the door. I'll open that up and swing it open and we'll take a look at what's down here. So here's the main drive wheel, and of course it has a rubber tire on it, as you'd find on any bandsaw. And you'll note that it has grizzly bear shaped cutouts. I think that's part of what you get for the Extreme series, but I'm not too sure about that. But it is kind of cool. In the user manual it just shows round holes here, so this is a special deal, I guess. And down here you have part of the drive mechanism, and that it plays a key role in switching from wood to metal cutting, but I'm not going to talk about that until a little bit later when we look at the motor and drive components. Have some brushes to knock chips off conveniently right before or right where the vacuum duct is. Right now I'm getting an accumulation of aluminum chips down here because I've been cutting mostly aluminum, and I'm not currently using this lower port, so it's not a big deal because you can see I got plenty of excess room there for future chips, but at some point I need to deal with that. I have the bandsaw just sitting on top of a Dolly that I got from Harbor Freight many years ago. Basically the same setup I used with my Wilton bandsaw that I had here before this one, and it worked out pretty well. It's not elegant or great, but it at least lets me get to the back side of the bandsaw when I need to, or I can move the bandsaw away from the wall if I have a long piece of work that needs some extra room on the back for cutting. So I can move the bandsaw around pretty easily. One disadvantage is that these are not locking wheels, and sometimes when I'm pushing a piece of work against the blade, the wheels might start to roll, so that's a safety issue. I probably need to put some locking wheels on there. Now, of course, Grizzly sells some bases with locking wheels that are a lot nicer than this, but I didn't want to spend the money on those right at the time I bought the bandsaw. I may go ahead and do that later, but have to think about that. The electronic controls are pretty straightforward. First off, you have this key locking power switch, and that turns the power off and on, as it says. And then you have this knob here that adjusts the blade speed from slow to fast, so you have variable blade speed, which is nice. Then down here you have the standard start and stop buttons that you see on most of the import machines, or probably all of them nowadays. Up here above the speed control knob you have this, I won't call it a tachometer, but it's a blade speed indicator in feet per minute. And when we turn the power on, you'll see that that lights up. It's LED, so it doesn't typically do well when you record it in video. Alright, well, I'm going to make a confession here at this point, because when I saw this feature in the catalog, I misinterpreted what it actually does. It has a LED here for wood, an LED here for metal, and a push button. So it says push to select. So you can switch between wood and metal with the simple push of a button. And I thought, man, that is exactly what I need, because it's a pain to switch between wood and metal on my older Wilton bandsaw. So I thought this would be great to have push button control of that. Ha! But I'll take full responsibility, because I should have read the manual carefully before I made my purchase decision. All this really does is change the interpretation of how fast the blade is going. In other words, it basically measures the speed of the motor and then divides it accordingly in the metal mode to reduce the apparent feet per minute. So that's all it does, and more about that as we get into it. So let's turn off the power switch, and that noise will stop. And of course the tachometer or blade speed indicator is off now, but you may hear a residual humming, and that humming just stopped. That's the three-phase converter shutting down. A cooling fan that stays on for 30 seconds or a minute after you turn off the power in order to cool down the inverter. Down below the start and stop buttons, we have this little chart here that gives you some recommendations for the speed of the blade in feet per minute. So what you can see from the chart, which is not surprising, is that the softer the material, the faster that you can run the blade. So for wood, you can run way up here at 2200 feet per minute. Then when you drop down to steel, it drops way down to 150 to 200. So I'm going to turn the knob all the way counterclockwise, and the LED, which might not be very readable on the video, is reading 100 feet per minute now in metal mode. And let's turn on the blade and see what that looks like. So I'm going to now push the green start button, and it sort of winds up in speed. The blade is moving pretty slowly at this point. As I advance the speed control knob, the sound changes. Okay, now I'm up at about 450 feet per minute. And we'll keep going all the way up to top speed, which is in metal mode, 650 feet per minute. Okay, then we'll turn it down again. So you have a pretty wide range of speeds, and that's nice because you can sort of tweak the speed while you're testing the material and find what speed works best. I'll hit the stop button. Now I'll turn off this key switch, and that shuts off the blower, but you can still hear some residual sound, probably a fan inside the inverter. In a minute that will stop. So there's a couple of things to notice here. One is when you press the stop button, that cuts off power to the motor and the blade will coast to a stop, but it takes a while, so you don't want to get your fingers anywhere near the blade until you visually confirm that the teeth are not moving. Secondly, when you hit the stop switch, even when it's at a complete stop, the machine is still powered on. There's still power to the inverter and possibly to other parts of the machine like this display. So it's not really off until you turn off this key switch. According to the manual, and of course if you want to be really safe, it's always a good idea to unplug it from your power source. Then you know for sure that it's not going to start up unexpectedly. Now we're looking at the back side of the machine. This is the very large motor, or at least it seems large to me compared to the motors on my other machines. You can see it's rated 2 horsepower, 60 hertz, 220 volts, 3-phase. Using a 3-phase motor with a phase converter, you can get higher horsepower from standard AC voltage in the home. To run the motor on 3-phase, you have to have a device, in this case an inverter that's back here behind this panel, to convert the single-phase 220 volt AC to 3-phase 220 volt AC. Here we have our inverter, converter, I'm not sure what the correct terminology is. These are really sort of revolutionary devices in the sense that in a small box at a relatively low cost and without any moving parts, except maybe a cooling fan, you can transform your household 220 volts power and gain more horsepower at the motor than you would otherwise be able to get.